Good evening. Welcome to the Carson City Airport Authority meeting here on Wednesday, March 16th at 5:30 in the afternoon. I'm going to call the meeting to order, ask for a roll call and determination of a quorum, if you wouldn't mind.
Chairperson Golden,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Pulitz, Treasurer Rogers, Member Jones, Member Hamilton, Member Hutter,
Here.
Member Norvell.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Fantastic. Stan, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. I trust this time we've all had the opportunity to review those. Anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns? Going once? Twice? Get a motion to approve the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority?
So moved.
We have a motion, and John?
Second.
Oh, thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second to approve those minutes of the past Airport Authority meetings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Fantastic. We have 6 ayes. I think that carries us. Modification of the agenda. We'll just skip that. We're not modifying this evening's agenda. Public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on any agendized or non-agendized matters related to the airport at this time. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If you require any additional discussion, please check in with me to calendar this matter for future Airport Authority meetings. So if any members of the public care to introduce themselves and speak to any matter, now would be the appropriate time. Anyone? Okay. We'll close public comment. Airport Engineers Report.
They should be dialed in or on the WebEx.
Danielle?
Hi. Yeah, Nadine's here.
Hi, Nadine.
Hello.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you.
Good deal.
So I'm just pulling up the update here. Okay. So we have the AWAS relocation project still rolling. The latest on the equipment, I believe the airport has received most, if not all, of the equipment by now. Is that correct, Corey?
I'm not sure if it's everything, but we've definitely received a lot of the equipment.
Okay, great. And as far as the special use permit application, I believe it's under review, and the Planning Commission of the city will be meeting on the 30th of this month. And so after that date, we should have a little bit more information. Again, I don't anticipate any issues with that getting approved. The contract agreement with Titan Electrical Contracting that's coming up here in your discussion, we are needing approval on that prior to them beginning any of their work. But again, we would need to wait on that 30th date just to make sure there's no snags with the Planning Commission from the city. And as far as the final grant application for that, I'm just waiting on. I just need the one signed page. It's the page in the application that has like the sketch or the map on it. And then we can get that turned into the FAA. And the deadline for that, I believe, is the end of this month. So we have a week or so. The snow removal equipment, the update I got today from Pape, the equipment supplier, they are still planning on shipping this spring, but I'll keep you posted on that. It for some reason there was a snag with their shipping, and I'm sure it has something to do with drivers or oil prices or what have you. As for the aeronautical survey for the nighttime approach project or projects, the designs on those. I did get an update from, Kaufman, and they are making sure the CADX for the offset PAPI and the MALSIF project is still going, and there shouldn't be any snags with that. That's still underway. I've requested an update from Lean Engineering, and we are going to have a meeting. It's going to be either the last week of this month or soon thereafter, and we'll get you some more information about how they're coming along with the design on that. And again, no grants received from the FAA. That's probably going to be late spring, early summer, if I had to estimate at a time frame for when we see those grants come through. No real update on the snow removal building. The status is the same. The ASIP meeting with the FAA, I'm planning on getting that scheduled for the 31st of this month at 1 p.m. And everything is on track for that. We do have the ASIP list ready to go for the discussion, and I don't anticipate any issues with that meeting time. So, if there's any questions I can answer.
Yes, John, go ahead.
Is it safe to assume at the ASIP meeting, we're going to put a strong case together to have the SRE building get built next year? Is that something, have we given up on that, so to speak, or is that going to be a topic of conversation on the 31st?
Yes, it will be a topic of conversation on that day in that meeting. It's definitely not something we've forgotten about, because especially with the snow removal equipment on its way, the SRE building is pretty high priority because we'll need somewhere to put that equipment. It is going to be a hot topic of conversation, and especially because the reason why it hasn't gotten started yet is because of something we couldn't really control, which was we didn't receive the bids, and there's reasons contractors chose not to bid it. So it'll definitely come up, and we're definitely still pushing for that one to go as soon as possible.
Sounds good. I'm counting on you.
Alrighty, thanks.
The second thing I'd like to just, and this is sort of maybe somewhat silly, but it's something on my mind, is could we rename the nighttime approach project? That's not really the gist of it, and it's not the way that Corey presents it when he goes out in the community. That's safety improvement or something along those lines. I just think that would probably be a more accurate statement of what we're trying to accomplish, and also less inflammatory would be maybe a way to describe it. So I'll let you and Corey work on that.
Okay,
Nadine,
we can definitely discuss that. Yes.
at the risk of pleading ignorance, is that meeting over the ASIP with your counterparts from the ADO, is that here in Carson City? Are you having it at your office? Is it going to take place in Phoenix or at a conference?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't specify. It is going to be a virtual meeting. The FAA is all still virtual. They're setting up Zoom meetings for these still. I do plan on, I can head down to the airport and join the group there, whoever will be joining from the airport, and we can it'll be semi in-person, semi virtual with at least the FAA.
Okay. I just wanted to know how, if anyone from the airport authority wanted to participate, how we could.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, that's it. The virtual, I can send out the link when we get that meeting information. That's a pretty easy way to join in, but we can also powwow at the airport too.
Okay, thank you. Any
No
other
problem.
questions? Any other questions for Nadine? Anyone? Okay, thank you, Nadine. We're going to move on. Consent agenda.
Thank you.
This evening's consent agenda has one item, which is to execute a contract with Titan Electrical for the AWAS, I believe. Is that correct, Corey?
That is correct.
Okay. So I trust everyone has read through the consent agenda item. And if anyone wants it pulled from the agenda, we can do so. Otherwise, we can vote on it without discussion. Okay. We can have a motion to approve the consent agenda as published.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the consent agenda as published in our agenda for this meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Harlow. Second? Thank you, Paul. Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as published. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We'll move on to public hearings. And we have 3 matters this evening. Public hearings. First one is discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to lease and reconsideration of an issue raised by tenant as to rent offset due to drainage actions on the parcel. Let me give a quick summary. At our January 19th meeting, we approved an ownership change of the Gonai Aviation lease where the parties have changed hands, and Kevin Updegrove is now one of the 2 partners in that leasehold. We set the rent per the terms of the lease at the current market rate of 28 cents a foot, and those matters were set forth in the lease amendment to be considered by the Airport Authority. The authority also heard and approved a rent offset to the tenant per an issue raised by tenant regarding drainage improvements alleged to be made by the city to the leased area. The matter is being reheard and reconsidered for a couple reasons. Number one, we have new information regarding that drainage improvement that was made to the parcel. And I want to personally apologize to both the Carson City staff and in particular Carson City Public Works. We should have given you the opportunity to solicit your input and represent the city and provide your knowledge of this matter to respond to the tenant's claims. Depending upon the outcome, we will either have that lease offset included or not in the lease amendment. We're only discussing the matter of the drainage issue and the rent offset. So, on that note, I see that the applicant is here today. Is there anyone here from Carson City Public Works? Could you approach us, introduce yourself, and give us some background on this matter? And again, my apologies, sir, that we didn't give you the opportunity in our January meeting to address this matter. Didn't know it was going to come up, actually.
Darren Schultz, Public Works Director, for the record. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
inviting me here today and giving me the opportunity to speak. We have familiarized ourselves with this situation that is out there related to the drainage. There's many, many years of history. Some of it we are aware of it, and some we are not, as much happened a long time ago. Really, the facts are, in terms of the way we look at things, we as a city, Public Works, we do not work on private property. We're not allowed to. And furthermore, we get tax dollars. Our efforts need to be spent in the public right of way. That's where we do our improvements. That's where we do our work. So that's a rule of thumb that we abide by. I cannot say what might have happened 20 or 30 years ago with the Public Works Department because I wasn't around and we have no records. We do know that approximately somewhere between 20 and 22 years ago, that work was done on the subject parcel to improve the drainage across it. It's been alleged that that was done by Public Works, but I don't know if that's true or not. I can tell you that our current practice and practice over the last 15 years since I've been here is we do not work on private property.
Sir, is your mic on?
It is.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Should I speak louder or maybe closer?
I don't know. I can hear you.
All right. I'll speak up a little bit.
That's fine.
So generally, when private property wants to do any type of an improvement to their property, whether it be just flat work or whether it be a vertical building project, they would come to the city for a permit. And part of that process of gaining a permit is the engineering that's required for that parcel or that site to be built. And included in that is, for instance, where do we tie into existing utilities? But also included that is flood control or drainage. And so it's obviously a case-by-case basis because the drainage is different all over Carson City. And the applicant works with the city engineering team to mitigate the drainage of that parcel or that area. This case that we have here, if there was to be some sort of development desired on that parcel or that corner of parcel, we would ask to go be part of the permit process and get engineers involved to figure out how to mitigate that drainage across there. It's been doing that for decades, a long time, but it's not, we have parcels all over town where drainage goes across it and it gets dealt with the development. That's just how it works. So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm certainly open to any questions.
Okay. I just want to ask you a question for the record.
Okay.
I know you've answered it, but I want to make sure everyone hears it. Just to clarify, does Public Works have any record of this project being promulgated by Public Works?
We do not.
Okay. Does Public Works have any record of this drainage project being performed by the leaseholder?
We do not.
Does Public Works have any record whatsoever of this project?
We do not.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions? Go ahead.
So, thanks for being here tonight. One of the questions that was inspired by your comments, at least with regard to today's policy at Carson City Public Works, you mentioned that Public Works does not make improvements to private property. I just wanted to visit that concept of private property in the context of the parcel we're talking about, which is airport property, and therefore by extension is city property. So how does the concept of private property apply in this case with regard to things that Carson City Public Works would or would not either perform improvements on or have different kinds of jurisdiction over, or the authority to say, we're going here and doing this?
I understand the question. And it possibly in certain minds or even in prior times, it could have been looked at differently. What I can tell you, the way it's been looked at in my time here, 15 years, is that the airport property is city property, as you state, but we do not go work on airport property. Public Works does not, as a rule, as history, as a rule. We don't do it. It's handled by the airport authority. If we were reached out to and said, hey, we have a problem here, we need some help, we would have to put some sort of an agreement together. We don't, the relationship between the airport authority and Carson City Public Works is not such where we just share back and forth. So that I can say without a matter of doubt that we don't work there.
Great. So for the purposes of airport property, it's the same way that you would approach private property, the way that you just mentioned in your remarks.
Absolutely. I would like to clarify one thing on the private property portion of my statement. Carson City does have, in fact, infrastructure, storm drainage infrastructure that is located on or somehow within private property. But the only time that we are allowed to do that is if we get an easement that is recorded, and it allows us to put the work there and then also maintain the work going forward. So I want to make sure that goes on the record. Thank you. Other questions?
John, go ahead.
Is there any city-performed drainage improvements on the airport property that you know of and with associated easements or not?
Not that I know of. But that doesn't, not that I know of offhand, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I just don't, I didn't look for them, so.
Stan, anything? Paul?
So I'll wait to see where this goes here before
Okay. Harlow, do you have anything
say anything.
for this gentleman to ask?
Well, I guess I just have trying to educate myself. At the time that Gonai Road was straightened out, there used to be a big curve, and now it was straightened out, and that intersection was reconfigured a little bit, and there's some drainage at that intersection now. Is that correct?
That's correct. I can't tell you about the drainage before the curve or right after the curve. I can tell you that there is drainage through that intersection now. Absolutely.
And there was cement. Looks like I went and walked around that property, and I can see where there's been cement poured, to direct excess water, onto the leasehold on the airport that doesn't end up in the drainage system. And a question had been asked to me is whether or not a drain could be installed approximately 100 feet to the east on the south side of Arrowhead that would then tie into the drainage system on the northeast corner of the Cubics hangar, and then would feed into the drainage system that runs under the runway and out through the center of the airport and on down to the south. And if that was possible, since it would be on city property, what would benefit our tenant, is there a way to estimate cost or participation, or is that something the city would be willing to look at or not?
So I can, I did not come here tonight prepared to discuss solutions, engineering solutions to it, as you've mentioned. What you said, I played that through in my mind, and I follow what you're saying. But until, we sat down and really looked at it and how it would work and where exactly it would go, I can't comment too much on that. The way we handle drainage around Carson City is the water kind of goes where it wants to go until there's a problem or until somebody wants to develop. And then we look at it, like I mentioned, on a case-by-case basis to solve that problem as to what's going on. So for this case here, if it was to be developed, it's in our mind, the city's mind, it certainly is a parcel that could be developed. The drainage just has to be mitigated. And I want to reiterate that we would want to be part of that process, working with the applicant on the drainage as to where it might go, how it could get there, size of pipes. Certainly, if it needs to run in the city right away, that's not unusual for development around town to have to put things in the city right away along the roads. And we're part of that process, and we either sometimes help to build it depending on where the drainage is coming from. B, it's built and then it's turned over to the city to maintain in the future. Or C, if it's on private property, we sometimes accept it with a given easement to maintain it.
So it is a discussion that could be had.
Absolutely.
Between the individual parties.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we've kind of hashed that. Go ahead, Paul.
What do we need to do to get that discussion going? Can we?
So,
I mean, you've committed now to start that discussion, so what do we need to do to make it happen?
So really what happens with this project or any project is the developer of the project gets with an engineer, has to hire an engineer, and they look at the parcel, they decide what they want to try to do, they put together plans of how it might work, and then they come down and meet with the city engineer to start hashing that out as to what works, what doesn't work, what could go here, there, that sort of thing.
Okay, so it'd be up to us to kind of develop a plan and
Well,
submit
it's-
it and get it to you and get going that way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not up to us, Paul. It's up to the leaseholder.
Okay, leaseholder.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, and yes, I wanted to be clear that the discussion that I was referring to would be between the leaseholder
Yes,
of the property as far as determining a direction forward.
I certainly understood that, but thanks for your clarification. Well, I think we've gotten plenty of clarity from you. Appreciate your input, and again, our apologies for not bringing you in back in January, and hope you can accept that.
Absolutely.
Good deal.
It's no problem.
I know the applicant is here this evening, or representative of the leaseholder. Kevin, did you have anything you'd like to weigh in on here?
Kevin Updegrove, good evening, and thank you. Similar to what Harlow mentioned, prior to January, February, I was listening to the whole discussion, and Steve and I had many conversations, but it wasn't until recently that I really went out and paced myself through that area and to try and understand it more, because frankly, Steve was carrying the weight of it, so I kind of let him run with it. But when I looked at it, it is pretty clear as to when it occurred. Who knows? Because obviously, I have no idea when it actually occurred. But you can certainly see where there's a catch basin and then a gully, if you want to call it, a rock line gully that takes drainage out. That makes it difficult to, that in combination with when that road was put in, which elevated the area back in there, you can kind of see how any water coming in can't go anywhere except right down into the current hangar, say it that way. So not only is it potentially an issue with any future development, it could potentially be issues flooding into the current hangar. I think that's occurred. I don't personally know because I was in Florida for about 10 years until about 2 years ago. But I've conversations with George before he passed and whatnot. I think there's been some issues. So anyhow, my understanding is there is an issue there. That if we could figure out a way around it, it would probably help any future work. And then at the same time, also alleviate any issue we might have with that hangar and things inside the hangar should we have a flood go down through there. Because really, just if you walk out there, you really can see how it has nowhere else to go, simplistically. And the other question I had is, I think back in January, there was another piece of property. This has to go to the then current rate discussion that hadn't appraised yet. And I was wondering if it had appraised, and if so, what is the appraisal rate on that, if it's relative to the conversation for at that point in January, I think it was 28 cents.
I'm not aware of any. There was the triangle parcel. Is that
Perhaps
you're
that
referring-
was it.
Okay,
yeah.
but that's not apples to apples because it's not being appraised for full service FBO, which you hold a full service FBO lease, and it's for dry aircraft storage only.
Okay.
I don't. Has that been completed? The appraisal?
That appraisal was completed, yes.
Okay. It
Okay.
has been completed. It's
What
not.
you're
It's
saying
just
is-
not apples to apples is the issue.
Okay, so the 28 cents was more apples to apples from.
It was based on a larger parcel, much larger parcel, that would permit full service FBO services, which your parcel has the right to full service FBO services. And in fact, to my knowledge, you have a maintenance facility operating in there, which falls under that category.
Mhm.
So the appraised values go up as the use goes up. If it's limited to dry aircraft storage, you're going to have a lower value.
Okay, so if it was appraised, it's not relevant, is what you're
That's
saying.
exactly what I'm saying. It was appraised. I don't want to speak out of term, but correct me if I'm wrong. For dry aircraft storage, it came in at 26 cents a foot. Is that correct?
The update was 25 cents.
There you go.
Okay, so to ask for something lower than 28, would that be appropriate or not appropriate?
That would be quite inappropriate, being that
Okay.
You
Thought
have
I'd ask.
gentlemen behind you that are entering into a lease for land for full-service FBO rights at 28 cents a foot.
Okay. Any questions for me?
So the issue before us tonight is to whether we're going to stick with the abatement that we gave you in the January meeting or not. Are you still asking for one?
Yes.
Carl, I think you're chomping at the bit to say something here.
Well, yeah,
ahead.
but it would be discussion on a motion that I guess we haven't made yet. So
Okay, well, let me.
it's not per se a question for Mr. Updegrove.
Okay. I have no questions for you whatsoever, but I want to give some background on this because I had the opportunity subsequent to our January meeting to do some research on this, and I want to make this very clear. There's nothing personal in what I'm saying. In fact, you weren't even involved in this matter, like you said, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there is a record, believe it or not, of aerial photography available to the public that shows in graphic detail a lot of lands around Carson City, virtually everything. And I was able to determine, not to the day, not to the month, but virtually to the year of when that drainage went in. In 1998, that drainage was not present. It was either 98 or 99. I'd have to look at the record and look at the photographs, but it was one of those 2 years that drainage was not there. 2 years later, that drainage was there. And I'm going to make a conjecture, a hypothesis, because when you look at the aerial photography of that parcel, there is a test bed that was used by the tenant before Gonai Aviation ever existed. And it was an asphalt pad with what looks like metal rebar. Steve can embellish on that a little. It may not have been metal rebar. It may have been metal wiring, but it was crisscross, like a chessboard, basically. And it was a test bed to test electronics on. And you can clearly see in the earlier photograph in the late 1990s that there is sediment and water flow going right over that test bed. You can see it, plain as day. In the subsequent photograph, not only has that been cleaned up, but the drainage specifically goes around that test bed perfectly so that the tenant at the time had the use of that test bed without any sort of issue of water contamination to it. No sediment flowing through there, no drainage, no water. And I'm going to make an educated guess based on that aerial photography. This was done for the benefit of that test bed, for the benefit of the tenant. Who did it? Hard to say. Public Works has told us straight up they have no record of it whatsoever. I find it hard to believe Public Works would actually do that work on a private leasehold and do it for the benefit of that test bed, which is really for the benefit of the tenant. But this is available in the public record. Again, my next comment, I want to make it very clear, is not directed at you, Kevin. I will use the words Gonai Aviation. Gonai Aviation assumed this lease with full knowledge of the condition of this property to come back to the airport authority after the fact and seek rental abatement for a condition that has been there for 20 plus years, in my opinion, is not appropriate. Every single person I know who owns property has some portion of their property that they cannot use for one reason or another. Could be drainage, could be slope, grade, easement. There's a litany of different issues. But this condition existed And the tenant, and again, you were not a part of this, but the tenant took this property, assumed the leasehold with full knowledge of the condition of the property. I cannot, in good faith, on behalf of the taxpayers and on behalf of the airport, support a rent abatement to offset a drainage ditch that was placed there that the tenant knew was there and now has come back to us years and years later asking us for compensation for that. And I just think it's wrong. There's no reason why the tenant cannot spend their money and do what they want with this parcel. It's not that expensive to do, but to seek contribution financially from the taxpayer, basically a subsidy from the airport to turn this into something else, that's their nickel, not ours. And that's my opinion.
I have a question. When you say that potentially the leaseholder, we could do it on our nickel and it wouldn't be that expensive, I don't today have any understanding of how much it would cost to do that.
Okay. But
So maybe that's an opinion, but
yeah, but
I
to
don't
move
know.
to move some drainage is not a huge undertaking here. And you just heard from the Director of Public Works who said that they would gladly work with you to see if there's a way to divert that into the stormwater system. But it's really not the airport's nickel and shouldn't be, because the condition has existed there and we know it factually for about 20 years. And beforehand, it was actually worse. And I'd be happy to offline share with you the aerial photography and the dates of those photographs and show them to you.
Okay.
They do exist. I know Councilor Takis has seen them because he directed me to the site where the aerial photography was. I'm pretty sure our manager, Corey Jenkins, has seen that aerial photography. If you haven't, I can share it with you, but you have seen it. So you can verify what I'm saying then.
Yeah, I've seen it, and I saw the same thing that you're explaining.
Yeah, and it's nothing personal, Kevin. I want to make that really clear. It's just before you were involved in this, the tenant assumed the lease knowing this condition existed. And it was certainly something that was done for the benefit of the leaseholder before Gonai Aviation ever existed. It was done for cubics. You can see from the pictures exactly what was done. So, Carl.
Yeah, just, Kevin, a quick question. To refresh our memory, and I'm sorry that I don't recall, but when we spoke in January, could you just refresh our memory as to any conversation or efforts you've had in pursuing an improvement or permitting of the structure that you're interested in, or the paving that you're interested in creating? It seemed, my recollection is that there was a conversation you relayed about exchanges you've had with the city, and maybe I'm misremembering this, but I felt there was an element of either some confusion or frustration around getting feedback that suggested that it wasn't possible, or it wasn't going to be feasible to, even if it is on your nickel, make this change or this improvement. What am I remembering from that? I just want to make sure that we have an update as to that, because I think the general sense here is from Public Works is, hey, happy to work with you to engineer a solution that resolves this and ties that drainage into the city system. But I just remember there was an element to our conversation that seemed to say that you were having some frustrations with that.
Well, I have trouble with my memory, so I'm not sure I can go back in your memory. But what I think you're thinking of is the discussion in January had to do with a prior meeting with Public Works back in, I don't know, Corey, do you remember the date of that meeting? Exactly.
It was right after I started.
Anyhow,
So maybe September.
September, October, and that meeting didn't result in any actionable plan. I think the feeling that, and I'll speak for Steve because I think he probably spoke more than I did, but I was at the meeting also, was sort of the same thing that was mentioned earlier, that it's not really the city's responsibility to take action on fixing a problem on private property. In this case, it would be the airport property, but kind of a similar message that I think we received. And I think that was the frustration,
Okay,
not having a plan to go forward.
But
you
it
know.
was consistent with what we've heard here tonight, which is
I
that
think it's consistent.
that resolving this is not the city's responsibility because, in part, the city, has checked its records and attests that it did not create this through any of its works, and that this is sort of the natural condition that might exist on a parcel in the city prior to a potential developers doing something about it. As opposed to, and this is what I wanted to clarify, and I think you've just done that, as opposed to you went to the city to say, hey, we're looking to do some sort of mitigation here, and found that process frustrated. It was really a conversation about responsibility as opposed to what to do next.
Yes,
Okay.
I would agree. And along those lines too, I guess I'm confused because, again, I don't have the full history of everything that occurred. But the straightening out of Gonai, I think, was obviously a city project. And where that now exits, the drainage ditch is right onto the back of our property now. So that obviously resulted in drainage that wasn't there 20 years ago.
So one final thought exactly along that line, sir, is this, and my memory doesn't line these things up perfectly, but as the chairman described in his forensics around the aerial photography, something in that 98 to 2000 time this happening, who remembers when the Gonai realignment happened and when that intersection was redesigned? Was it around that same time? Is there a chance that, and there are folks in the room who know this answer either by memory or otherwise, is there anything that possibly is coincident about those two times?
Mr. Chairman, I think I might be able to simplify this just a little bit. I took the liberty of having a discussion with the mayor about the policy that the Board of Supervisors would pursue with respect to leases and any change to leases. So the realignment of Gonai Road and the reconstruction of the intersection took place prior to the reassignment of the lease in 2017. And so if I understand it correctly, the position of the city is that when the assignment was made, then the lessee accepted the property as it was at that time. So there weren't any changes to that intersection after 2017. So it is what it is. And as far as abating any of the lease rent, I had the impression that that would not be looked upon favorably by the city, because that is not how they would handle that with any of their other lessees in a similar situation. So again, it's not a personal thing, but if we went ahead and abated the rent here at this meeting, when it arrived at the Board of Supervisors, the amendment to that lease would not be approved. That's the problem, because approving it would then be inconsistent with the way all of Carson City's other leases are handled, creating an inequity. However, I think that the city, and what we've heard tonight, is certainly amenable to discussing mitigation efforts and what that would take. And I thought that's why I mentioned redirecting the water from that corner, because at that corner, that cement curb directs that down to the culvert where the riprap is and onto the property. But if that culvert could be changed to direct that water further to the east, and then a drain put in approximately where that asphalt driveway where the old gate is, and bring that water down to the drain that's right off the northeast corner of the building. That then ties into the drainage that goes out through the center of the ramp and under the runway and out to the center of the airport and on down to the south. And from what I heard tonight, the city would be amenable to discussing what that would take. And the airport, I'm sure that we would be, more than happy to assist in any way, that we could do so. We just wouldn't be able to pay for it. And I don't know, the city would have their own, view on that, but anything that happened prior to 2017 no longer matters because the lease was reassigned in 2017. And I think it is what it is. What we need to do now is find a solution or help you find a solution to make that property developable. And I just heard, from the representative from Public Works that they would be willing to enter a dialogue, with us to find a way that might be acceptable, to do that. I just know from the airport's part, it's unlikely that we would be able to spend, airport funds to do that. I don't know if that helps, Mr. Chairman. But
Thank you, Harlow. Hold on a second, John. Let me try to culminate this for everyone here. So Harlow kind of reiterated what I said, which is the lease was assumed with full knowledge of the condition of the property. And that condition predated the assumption of that lease by easily 15 years. So the lessee knew well the condition of the property. You heard from Public Works, and you heard that if you want to do something with the balance of your property there, hire an engineer, get some plans together, take it over to their office, to the city engineer, and they will be more than willing to work with you to come up with a solution. That's the process that needs to be followed. As an airport authority, we've done our job. It's not for us to engineer and design some sort of drainage remediation on the property. But Public Works is willing to entertain anything you propose. They've just told you that. But hire an engineer, let them know what you're doing. I think that's the next step in the process for you. John?
I think it's worth mentioning as we're having this discussion, Harlow already mentioned that the city oversees any lease agreements that we make. We can, do our work here, but the city has the right to approve or disapprove of any lease that we create. But that's authorized by an agreement that we have with the city. But in addition to that, we are actually a state agency. The airport authority is a state agency. And as a state agency, any leases that we enter into are governed by some pretty strict rules about what we can and can't do in terms of our leases, and some of those rules. And Mr. Takis, correct me if I'm misrepresenting any of this, please. But a lot of those rules specifically prohibit what we did in January, where we can we can offer abatements for various reasons. The rules really bind us to non-entrepreneurial behavior, very highly specified behavior, and so that's another issue for us.
No, Mr. Chairman, Kevin, that's what I was trying to say. If we take an action here that is inconsistent with the practices that the city applies to all of their other leases, it would be of no avail. You know, that's,
I understand.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Stan and Paul, did either of you want to weigh in on this matter, or we're good? Okay. So, Kevin, did you have anything else you wanted to address us with on this matter?
No, I'm good.
Okay, my apologies. I know we didn't
It's
meet
okay.
your expectations.
I get it.
We kind of have our hands tied on this. But nonetheless, we have a lease amendment before us, and it accurately reflects what we've been discussing. And that would be the change of ownership and the rental increase that goes into effect retroactive to January 1 at 28 cents per square foot per annum. Does anyone have any questions about that amendment? If not, we need to take a vote on it. Anyone?
So perhaps, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify.
Yes, sir.
At the meeting in January, we passed a motion that approved terms to be reflected in a lease amendment that included the abatement. Then, in the meanwhile, that amendment was drafted, these new thoughts were put in. So this is the first time we've seen a fully drafted amendment.
That is correct.
And in this case, the amendment as presented does not have the abatement in it.
That is also correct.
So when there is mention in the potential action to amend the amendment or accept it as presented, the as presented does not include an abatement. And if for some reason we wanted to have something different, that would actually alter the language presented to us tonight by staff, right?
Steve Takis, Airport Council. I gave you two versions. I gave you one version that was based on exactly what you did in January, and a second version that was based, that assumed that there would be no rebate so that you had them both ways. However,
Got it.
I've just noticed some typos in the, in one of them, in the one that has no rebate, because it sounds like that's where you're going. And so I think the action to take at this point is to reaffirm the approval of the ownership change, the setting of the rent at 28 cents a square foot, and that no rebate is going to be given, if that's what your decision is.
Yeah, I did
And-
not see that second amendment
Yeah.
in there. Steve, what are the typographical errors that
I have the
you-
wrong dates in there. You were correct. It was in the 1998 to 1999 timeframe.
Uh-huh.
I had 1989 to,
Yeah, it was 98, 99,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. And then in 2001 or 2002, all of a sudden, there's the drainage ditch.
then it was all there. And then 2006, Cubics came back to the airport authority to extend their lease, and they certainly accepted it. They didn't
Right.
ask for any kind of change. And then in 2017, Gonai Aviation came in and asked for an assignment of the lease. And again, there was no objection to that. There was no modification for that. It was accepted. So I think in terms of a motion at this point, what I recommend you do is move to approve an amendment which confirms the change in ownership, sets the rate, the rental rate at 28 cents per square foot, and provides that there's no rebate to be given to the tenant for the drainage issue.
Point of clarification, Counselor. Do we need to even reference any matter regarding the rebate in a lease amendment?
No, we could take that out completely.
I see no reason to have that in there, but maybe perhaps I'm missing something.
Well, since we approved it last meeting, wouldn't it be appropriate to mention it, that we've just that we're.
Well, my point is not to have it in the amendment at
Yeah,
all.
you would still make the same motion, but I
Right.
think you've got a good point there. It doesn't need to be in the amendment. I mean, I can't think of a reason why if you're not giving it, you would put it in. But
Yeah, I think the
Duration.
minutes of this meeting will serve, if that's the decision that's taken, to show that there was a change in that. I think I'm with the chairman that there's no reason to memorialize that in the amendment.
Well, what's the opinion of the airport authority?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I said previously, I think we're bound by what the city would require of us in order to approve, any changes or amendments to that lease. So I think we need to approve the change of ownership and set the lease rate at 28 cents. I so move.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the change of ownership and set the lease rate retroactive to January 1, 2022 at 28 cents per square foot per annum. Our legal counsel is going to correct the amendment, and it'll be revised and ready for signature. Steve, do we need to approve the amendment at a later date? Okay, so we will approve the amendment as revised, as discussed. So Article 3 of the amendment will be removed. Article 1 and 2 of the amendment will be approved with this motion.
I so stipulate in the motion.
Okay?
Question.
Yes.
Is there anything we need to include in this motion to specifically address the decision taken at the January meeting? I mean, does there have to be language in the motion that says we reverse or nullify a motion passed at the January meeting?
I don't think so. If you approve this amendment, you've effectively done that. So I don't think you need
Okay,
to do
great.
that.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And thank you both gentlemen for appearing before us this evening. Sorry to take up your time with this. Yeah, we appreciate it though. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2 in public hearings. This is a continuation from our March 3rd meeting regarding supplement of missing bid items on consideration of the sole bid received from Carson Tahoe Executive responsive to our resolution and solicitation to lease and award a parcel of land known as the Bravo lease parcel. It's approximately 12 acres located within the northeast 1/4 of Section 4, Township 15, North Range 20 East in Carson City, as described in the survey document, which we, if I'm correct, still are awaiting.
No, we
Well,
have,
we do-
we have the
have that.
survey document and we
Okay.
made it available when we did the resolution. What we don't have is the recorded record of survey,
Okay,
which is what we need before we can actually record the lease.
okay. The lease award is to be made pursuant to the Nevada Revised Statute, Section 244.283. Steve, it's all yours.
Okay, so at the special meeting on March 3rd, as you know, the authority opened the sealed bid that was received. There was only one received, and
Absolutely.
that was from Carson Tahoe Executive. At the time, we went through the bid and generally looked okay, but it was missing some components. Generally looked okay. By generally looked okay, I'm referring to, did it meet the criteria in the resolution, which is the first hurdle to clear before the authority could consider it. There were 4 things that we found that were absent from the bid. And so that item was continued until this meeting, which was a meeting held within 21 days of the first meeting, which is the requirement in the statute, so that they could supplement it. And in fact, Carson Tahoe Executive did supplement it. They did provide us building material and design specifications, an artist sketch, a completed lease proposal form, which included the financial statement. They actually had the completed lease proposal form, but it didn't, it says that they were to attach a financial statement. It was not attached. Instead, they had included a letter from Mr. Jeff, or a letter from a financial institution to Mr. Jeff Pickett, stating that he had over $1 million on account. And it was missing a statement verifying that the terms and conditions of the lease and the bid proposal, essentially, that the city or that the airport authority set as the criteria, were accepted. Now, at that meeting, Mr. James Pickett was very upfront and said, yeah, I'm telling you right now, we're accepting those. Is that good enough? The resolution says it's got to be in writing, so as silly as that sounds, we asked him, please put it in writing. Okay, and he did that as well. And so from the standpoint of the bid meeting the criteria of the resolution that put it out as an offer, it's my legal opinion, it meets all the criteria. And so that gets us over the hurdle of it's legally sufficient for you to consider and legally sufficient for you to award the lease. It doesn't require you to award the lease, but it puts you in a position where you can. There is one additional item I would like to mention, and that is in subsequent discussions with Carson Tahoe Executive, they asked some questions about the environmental aspects of the parcel. And of course, they'll be responsible going forward for environmental considerations. But their concern was, well, what if there's something there that was really the fault of the airport? Or maybe even before the airport, the city, or maybe before the city, whatever we were before we were a city. And their question was, would they be held responsible for remediating that kind of contamination? And I don't think I don't think the airport authority would ever take that position. I think that when we lease it to them, their obligation runs from when the lease is executed, not something that happened before. And certainly, if there were a problem before, I would see that as our obligation. As a result, I drafted some language that I believe addresses that. Well, I don't believe it does address that. And my recommendation is that we would add it to the lease. To me, this is more of adding a clarifying statement than making any kind of substantive change. But what it says is the tenant shall not be responsible for a hazardous material or environmental contamination that is found to have existed prior to the execution of the lease. If said condition prevents the ability of the tenant to use the leasehold and landlord is unable to rectify the condition in a timely manner, tenant may request and the landlord will not unreasonably deny the termination of the lease. So, I mean, if there was something really serious there, they should have the ability to request getting out of the lease, and I would expect the airport authority to do that. I think there's very little risk here, having been involved at the airport now for a grotesquely long period of time, and having had my aircraft stored in a hangar that faces this parcel. The only thing that we have done over the last 30 years with that area is occasionally park airplanes or vehicles there. Now, sure, those things leak sometimes, but typically those kinds of leaks, unless they're significant, are not going to cause an environmental concern. And if there were something found leaked there, which we had found on a parcel that the EAA had once tried to lease from us, it was a fairly easy remediation. You basically take out the contaminated dirt and you burn it. And of course, you hire somebody to come and do it who's qualified to do it, but it was not expensive or difficult. To me, that's probably the only realistic risk, if there is anything like that at all. And so I understand what they're saying, the proposed tenant is saying, because they don't have that history with the property. And so I would recommend that if you award the lease to them, you also include this language. One other thing I just want to mention, I had mentioned a little bit earlier, you had actually asked the question, Mr. Chairman. The lease needs to refer to a parcel, an actual piece of property. We do have the legal description for that property. We know exactly how big it is, where the borders are and everything else. And that was included with our resolution so that we could precisely identify exactly what's being leased. And that is what Carson Tao Executive expects to be leasing. What we don't have is a record of survey map, because we've had difficulty getting the surveying company to get that recorded. They have responded to our airport manager earlier today, saying they should have it recorded by next Friday. And so once we get it recorded and we can have the assessor attach an assessor parcel number to it, then we can fill in the rest of the blanks on the lease, because the lease that I gave you in your packet is missing that. It's on this map, recorded on this day is this document, and here's the APN. And the APN's not as critical as the recorded map. And so if you award the lease today, we won't be able to sign it until we have that information plugged in, because without that, it's not a complete document. And so my recommendation is, once that gets complete, I will complete that document. I will get it to the Airport Authority for signature. I will get it to Carson Tao Executive for signature. And as long as everybody acts in a reasonably prompt manner, there should be no issue. When I say reasonably prompt, we've never really had an issue with this before, but if someone just sat on the lease and didn't sign it, whether it was the Airport Authority or the proposed tenant, I think it becomes stale. Now, there isn't a statute that says what that time period is, but we would be reluctant, maybe in an extreme example, if you took care of it and they didn't sign it for 6 months, it's doubtful that you would want to honor that, because 6 months later, a lot of things may have changed. You'd want to relook at the whole thing. So those are the issues that I have to add. And of course, I'm here, and so is the airport manager, to answer any questions you might have.
In Member Pulitz's absence, I did receive comments from him. I trust he didn't try and tie in remotely, but yeah, and he shouldn't, considering what he's doing. I told him today, I'm like, don't bother, enjoy yourself. So let me read to you a couple of comments before we start discussing this matter on his behalf. This is from him verbatim. Pursuant to our phone conversation regarding the CCAA meeting this evening, I hope to call in via WebEx application while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, Tim, I hope you're not doing that right now. In the event I am unable to do so, the following is my position regarding agenda item H-2 CTE lease application. It is my understanding that CTE intends to provide the missing documentation required by Mr. Takis to finalize the lease tonight. Going off of Tim's comment right now, it's our understanding that that has occurred. I've reviewed it. It looks
Yeah.
great. Looks fantastic.
It's all posted in your packet.
Yep, looks great. Item number 2, Tim brings up, I also understand that CTE is requesting some type of remedy provision in the event that the FAA-required Part 163 analysis causes unforeseen remediation expense. For the record, I fully support CTE's request for the airport to take responsibility for costs associated with findings that require remediation. Of course, the final verbiage must be crafted by Mr. Takis. Sincerely, Tim Pulitz, Vice Chair, Carson City Airport Authority. And that is what he has given me to represent him equitably this evening with his comments. And I think that we're pretty much all on the same page. I do want to take an opportunity to make a clarification on this particular matter so that the airport authority, in particular the treasurer and of course our manager, fully understand the economics of this matter. In our solicitation, I believe it was, we had stated that rent was to be paid in advance, 1 year in advance at time of execution of the lease. That is inconsistent with the lease, and the lease always governs the document. It's the governing document by which we live and die by. I just want to make this very clear to the applicant that you're not required to pay 1 year rent in advance. However, you are required to commence paying rent immediately, and it is on a monthly basis. So we don't require a year's worth of rent. And it's in the lease, and Mr. Pickett stated that he accepts the lease terms as set forth in that document. I'm sure he has read through it, but for the record and for the knowledge of everyone here at this meeting, I want everyone to understand it's monthly rent, and it does get paid commencing basically immediately upon execution. It's the first day of the month subsequent to approval by the Board of Supervisors. Okay, so if anyone has any questions about that, now's the time to address that matter. Aside from that, I see no reason why we wouldn't approve this, but give the applicant an opportunity, if they so desire, to opine on the matter and have any questions or comments. Oh, no, the entire matter. Entire matter. And your name is, sir? My name is Rob Howard. Okay. Okay, very well. Right, no, I understood that. Members of anyone else, members of the public, care to opine on the matter? No? Okay. Oh, sure. That's what we're here for. As I said, I see no reason why we shouldn't accept this and move forward with it. Any comments, questions by Airport Authority members?
No questions or comments other than to suggest that it's been, as somebody who's worked a fair bit on this matter with CTE's representatives and our staff to clarify the process and questions, and good ones at that, and understand this development in a great bit of detail. I'm certainly very excited to join those who have said that they believe that the requirements of the statute and the bid process have been met. And I would enthusiastically go forward and support a motion or make a motion to do that if that's the time.
I would say it's the time, but John Rogers, go ahead.
Council Takis, just to be clear, the wording that you gave us, or the paragraph you gave us about environmental contamination, that is not in the lease that's in our board packet. That's separate from it.
That's correct. In my proposal would be that you include that language in your motion and we include it in the lease. I think it will give the tenant the comfort to know that we will stand by any kind of contamination that occurred before them.
So we don't have a Superfund site, do we?
No,
I had to ask.
Airports have their issues, usually it's related to old aircraft that were designed to drain their oil, their radial engines, into the ground, something that people did quite frequently before they realized it was a problem. But I don't know of any problems with that land. That land was originally John D. Winter's land, and he gave it to the airport in return for he also gave us the roadway for Arrowhead Drive and a whole bunch of other things gave to the city. And one of the things that he conditioned on that gift was having some through the fence access, which is still in place. But there's no evidence that that was used for anything other than maybe some grazing. And I'm not sure how much grazing there would be done there because it was all sagebrush for the longest time.
Any other comments, questions? Carl, now would be the time.
Well, before I do that, I will make one amplification to council's comment about the environmental state of that site. I won't claim that you might not find a variety of model rocket engine casings from about 40 years ago, but if you do, I'd be happy to come clean them up for you.
Nothing neither of us didn't do, right?
That's right. That was a very popular place for those activities when I was a little guy. With that, I would move that we award the lease of the East of Bravo parcel to Carson Tahoe Executive LLC on the basis of the bid submitted and at the rate of 28 cents per square foot per year under the terms offered by the authority as amended by the environmental responsibility language provided by council tonight, and authorize and direct the chair to execute the lease with the lessee signature and authorize staff to present this executed lease to the Carson City Board of Supervisors for their approval and ratification.
Okay, we
Second.
And a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Sorry for the punishment of having to sit through this. Just is what it is. Oh, no, that's what we do. It looks, and I will personally say I'm glad that we got the renderings and the schematics. That's really something that we needed. It looks great. We didn't need much more than that. It's exactly what we were looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to your investment in the airport.
Thank you for that.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the discussion and possible action to review and approve our fiscal year 22-23 preliminary budget for submission to the Nevada Department of Taxation. It's the second review of the prelim budget, and the NRS requires that a preliminary budget must be approved and submitted to the Department of Taxation no later than April 15th of this year. As our next meeting is after April 15th, we need to do it today. So, John, would you like to walk us through this? Any revisions since last time that you want to bring to our attention?
Okay, on the operating portion of our preliminary budget, nothing has changed. We got no feedback from anybody on the board, and so that remains unchanged. So all of the changes to the preliminary budget occur on the very last page of the document that was presented to you, which I'm working very hard to pull up here on my computer. Just a second. Oh, that's great. Thanks.
There you go.
Yeah, that helps. And so we only made two changes, and they're both in the very last page under CCA-funded capital projects. Per the input that we got at the last meeting from Stan, we pulled forward a capital project to do a test section of the aggregate next to the taxiway out there. And then we also Stan mentioned that we ought to make a provision somehow to sweep our pavement effectively. And so our manager looked into that, and he is very opinionated that the best way to do that is with a piece of equipment called a FOD boss. And a FOD boss is a specialized piece of equipment that gets dragged behind a tractor or behind a motorized vehicle, and it removes all of the loose material on a hard surface without throwing it up in the air like a sweeper or a broom would do. It just captures it and removes it. And so we added the purchase of a FOD boss to the preliminary budget. Those are the only two changes. I would also mention that one of the items on our FAA-funded capital projects relates to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we had some money identified that was going to come to us next budget period from that, and we hadn't identified the projects for that yet, how that money was going to be spent. That's going to be discussed on the March 31st meeting with the FAA. So it's well within the realm of possibility that there will be a change between the preliminary budget and the final budget that we have to approve at our May meeting. That delineates how that money is going to be spent, but that's the only change that I expect to have between the preliminary budget and the final budget. So there's my summary.
Okay, thanks, John.
A question, Mr. Treasurer, and I imagine that what I'm hoping for is probably, a wish. The bipartisan infrastructure bill proceeds are not are not regarded as Carson City Airport share that gets levered up even more for FAA AIP grants, is it? I mean, it is considered the government money that goes alongside of AIP grants versus something we turn around and say, here's $295,000, that's our share FAA. So what is it, the other 92% or whatever it is now, the ratio?
Yeah, correct me if I say anything that different than what you know, Corey. But no, that'll be treated just like any other AIP grant. So
Okay.
the $295,000 is the total. Is the total amount that will be spent, and we're on the hook for 6.25% of that.
Yeah, 6.25%. Great. Okay, so it's treated like like an AIP grant where we have the same matching amount that's expected.
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. Wishful thinking.
Okay, any other comments from members of the Airport Authority? Questions for John? Seeing none, probably want to approve this. Anyone want to move to do so?
I move to approve the FY 22-23 preliminary budget and direct staff to submit to the Nevada Department of Taxation.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second for the fiscal year 22-23 budget to be submitted to the Nevada Department of Taxation?
I'll second.
Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks, John. That's it's just difficult work to do that. I got to tell you, it really is. So we appreciate what you do for us. So, as I was pulling through all my paperwork, I kind of blew it here and put my agenda somewhere in here. Thanks. If we could have the airport manager's report next.
This is Corey, the airport manager, and we'll start out with the fuel flowage. We had a slight decrease of 5% over last year, but I found that to be interesting because there's actually an increase from the self-serve. So this was kind of interesting. General aviation was flying more, but the drop in sales probably came from corporate traffic. The Bobcat that was approved has been ordered, and they expect that to be a delay of about 120 days before they can actually ship it. They've already built it and they have it ready to go, but they're waiting on the microchips for it to finish it, to get it to us. The fire department is working on formally defining the parcel of the fire station. That's just something that I wanted the board to be aware of, and we're working with the fire department on accomplishing that. The FAA approached me requesting that we do an emergency drill at the airport. This could potentially be a pretty large project involving the fire department and the police department, as well as dispatch. And I would like to accomplish this drill. We're in very early stages of this, but I plan to approach the police department and fire department about that and ask if they would like to participate, and then ultimately come up with a plan and then perform an actual drill. It would be everything from the simulated incident to a phone call into 911 and then the fire department, police department's response, as well as the airport staff's response to that. So I'll be working on trying to get that accomplished. I don't expect that to be a very quick process. That's something that I'm working on. Aircraft operations, we had 1,880 total operations according to ADSB data, and the detailed charts are attached. And that is all that I have.
Okay, any report from our legal counsel?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. One, on the budget, I want to congratulate you. Usually, we don't get a full approval of the tentative budget, the preliminary budget. It's not required by law. It's the only thing that's really required is that the treasurer sign off on that preliminary budget by April 15th and deliver it. But I think it's great that you guys have actually analyzed it and come up with something that you all approve. That's should make it very easy when we get to the date in May when we have to approve it as a final budget. Second thing is in line with the lease that you awarded for the Bravo parcel tonight, there's still an Albatross, old aircraft, old Grumman aircraft, parked on that area. And so the airport manager and I are going through the process of demanding the rent. He's delinquent 15 months at this point. B, telling him he's got to move it to someplace else, either on the airport, tie down, whatever. And C, if he doesn't do those things, A, we'll move it at his expense, and we'll also institute a lien sale. So we set up the original letter to him so it meets all the criteria under NRS 108 to follow up with a lien sale. And so we're in the process of doing it, and that letter will go out by certified mail to him tomorrow. There's a possibility, because we haven't gotten paid rent in a while, that we get no response. But if we get no response to the certified letter, we've still met the conditions of the statute, and we can go to the next step and do a lien sale. The likely purchaser, by the way, is not going to be somebody who wants to own an Albatross. Its likely purchaser is going to be somebody who sees the aluminum recycling value of a large aluminum aircraft, which is how the last one that was derelict on the airport was disposed of. And so that's where we see that going. The last thing is the airport, the fire station that's right next to the airport is actually on the airport's parcel. And so we're working with Robert Nellis in Carson City to identify the boundaries so we can cut that parcel off so it's not part of the airport. This is something that's probably an important thing to do at some point, because at some point we expect that the city will want to transfer to the airport property, but the city is never going to want to transfer their fire station to the airport. And nor do we have the skills, finances, or anything else to operate a fire station. And so, so we're working with them. The first the first proposal that came back from Robert was a little bit of an overreach in terms of the area that he had carved out. He had basically taken it to all of the edges of the leases on the airport instead of to the fence line where the airport property begins. In terms of the ring road, was going to take it right up to the pavement, but we need some space between that pavement for that road. And so we sent it back to him, asking him to have the surveyors who are laying this parcel out for him realign it to where the existing fence line is. He also had included an area that we had just paved recently. And so we're going to get that cleaned up. But my expectation is at some point we'll get that dialed in to the correct space, and then we'll be bringing it back to you for approval, and the city, of course, will approve it. And then it'll get reparceled and it'll be removed from the very large parcel that includes the airport. That's the other thing we're working on. And then one other thing we're working on is improving the avigation easements. When we have development that occurs near the airport, we typically ask them to give us an avigation easement, or to at least acknowledge there's an airport. You're building right next to an airport. There's going to be airplanes going over. Airplanes sometimes make noise. And so the FAA actually has a model for use for aviation easements. And so we're working on trying to integrate that into the Carson City format so that Carson City planning and developers, whoever's around, have a document that's ready, set up for them. They just fill in their information. That's the last thing that I have. Oh, yes.
On that navigation easement concept, the intent being is that any development on a parcel that's within some footprint that can be shown on a map, of the center of the airport would have acceptance of that navigation easement put into the terms of their planning approvals?
Yeah, it would be one of the criteria that's included, and we would pay some consideration for it. Typically pretty small consideration, but we'd pay something for it. So around the runway, there's the Part 77 airspace, and it goes out like an angular space, and you don't want people to build up into that space because when you're coming into land, you want to make sure there isn't anything sticking up in the air that you could hit or come dangerously close to, even if you don't hit it. And so when anybody builds around the airport, we check to make sure it doesn't invade the Part 77 airspace, in which case they can't build that high. But certainly we want them to acknowledge there's airplanes flying overhead. And that's really the primary objective of the navigation easement. And depending on how close they are to the airport, that really is the indicator of when we get a navigation easement. If somebody's building in South Carson, we're not going to ask them for a navigation easement. But if somebody's building near the airport, particularly under our traffic pattern, then that's important. And usually, most of the people that build, they know there's an airport there, and sometimes that's the attractive reason to build there. So very few people are surprised by the navigation easement. The only people that have given us surprises about it are people that move to Carson City and locate on the north side end of town, and then they go, "Oh my God, there's an airport near me," and they complain to us. That's been the history, but we've pretty much worked through that problem. That's all I got.
Okay, anything from our airport authority members? Treasurer's report. John?
You have the financials in front of you. There's nothing in there. It's noteworthy that our revenues are up this year significantly, but all I want to mention at this treasurer's report is that there's two cost items that we have dramatically overrun this year so far. Neither one of them pushes us into any kind of problems with, overspending our budget to a, difficult degree. But the two areas where we are significantly over budget are our legal costs for the year and our accounting costs for the auditing costs for the year. And so Corey and I, on the auditing costs, what's happened is that the accounting rules for public entities have changed, and most accounting firms don't do public entities anymore. And so there's very limited competition in that area, and therefore the prices immediately jumped up dramatically. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to mitigate that going forward. We've included a provision for that in the going forward, but Corey and I are going to see if there's any way that we can mitigate some of the auditing costs. As far as the legal costs goes, those are being driven by the lease activity that we're doing, but also by the change of management. There was a lot of legal effort spent during that time period, as you all can remember. And so I'm hoping that our legal costs continue to be high until we get the triangle parcel leased. And then I'm hoping that we get back to, I would say, a more normal flow for our needs for legal services. And so I thought those are the only two items I thought were worth mentioning.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no one from the public who cares to comment, I can't think of any agenda items we're going to have on our next meeting, but I'm sure we'll come up with some. No question about that. And on that matter, wow, what a productive meeting. Really, really good. We're going to adjourn.